Crossovers in media have become essential to creating exciting new content, especially to the world of video games. One of the earliest releases of crossover games is the 1992 Super Famicom football game, Battle Soccer Field no Hasha. It was a game that brought together some of Japan's biggest franchises, Gundam, Ultraman, Godzilla, and Kamen Rider. Battletoads Double Dragon was another crossover game that was released in 1993. This was a mix of characters from the Battletoads series that was created by Rare, and Double Dragon, which was created by Technos Japan. Even though crossover games have been on the decline since the early 2000s, Capcom has produced the most amount of them compared to others. Capcom's collection of crossover games have become known as the Vs. Capcom series, involving brands such as Marvel Comics, SNK, Tekken, and one of the most ambitious ones yet, Tatsunoko Productions. It was to be a game that would pit some of Capcom's best up against some of the most recognized anime superstars of the past decades into what will be regarded as one of the biggest fever dream titles that almost never made it out of Japan. On this edition of the Uncommon Valley, we look at the history behind the arcade and Wii exclusive fighting game that almost never got to be released in the US, as we check out the development history behind Tatsunoko vs. Capcom. Tatsunoko Productions is a Japanese animation brand that operated as a studio and is based in Tokyo, Japan. The company began when the anime pioneer Tatsuya Yoshida came up with the concept to create a studio together with his two brothers, Toyoharu and Kenji Yoshida. 2 years after their incorporation, they came out with their first series, Space Ace, which was made for TV in 1965. The company has since made hundreds of series and movies, and has continued developing all the way through 2017. With them have built such a huge catalog of who's who in the anime industry, they were looking to showcase them off in a way that many had hoped to become a reality, a fighting game. But who could they go to in order to make this game come to life? That is when Tatsunoko reached out to the guys over at Capcom, asking them to develop a game that relied on many of their household characters. Talks soon turned into ideas, and it eventually snowballed enough to the point of both companies coming to an agreement to begin work on the project. Ryota Nitsuma of Capcom was designated as producer of the game, and the company would then hire an independent company called Aiding to handle development and publishing. Nitsuma took special interest in making a video game that involved a lot of fighting, so they had to make the choice between two dominant types of fighting games around that time. Either make it a game in the style of Street Fighter, or they could make it into the Versus series style that included many more options for players to choose from, such as a tag system and character assist, with it making the most amount of sense considering that they'd done it before with the Marvel vs. Capcom series. It was set that the game was to be developed as a crossover fighting game. Ideas quickly turned to R&D on the game, alongside the development of Street Fighter IV. Part of the reason why they wanted to make a fighting game was to rekindle the desire for the genre since it was in the decline around that time. So development of the game officially started in the early months of 2007, in hopes that it would bring back interest for that style of gameplay. While exciting for Capcom, one of the snags they hit was which character from the various anime series that Tatsunoko had produced over the years would fit well under a fighting game engine. The team had the unbearable task of choice to choose which characters they wanted. Due to this, the bias was leaning towards characters they enjoyed personally, without much consideration of what hardcore gamers wanted. This was the equivalent of Disney boardroom executive was sticking with popular Disney characters such as Mickey Mouse, without much consideration of which ones would work under a fighting game engine. But that is a single part of the character equation. Another one was navigating licensing issues that was a real headache for the team itself. To quote Nitsuma himself, "We had to consider licensing issues. Once we had that list, we had to figure out how to make a balanced fighting game. On top of that, we wanted a good balance between male and female characters." Eventually, the characters that were selected did not please the team at Tatsunoko very much, as they complained of being left out of the decision process and were mostly left with suggestions when they tried to inquire about exactly why certain characters were excluded while others were included instead. For example, the team refused to include some of the characters from Samurai Pizza Cats without much of an explanation, despite the fact that the fans that loved them and wanted to see them so badly in the game. By May of 2008, the amply named game was then titled Tatsunoko vs. Capcom: Cross Generation of Heroes. It was built for the Japanese arcades and was specifically configured for its board and proprietary hardware. It was also based on the technology that was being used for the Nintendo Wii. Capcom distributed beta units of the arcade to Tokyo and Osaka, Japan. While the game was not a fully complete version of the build, the team took the time to prepare the market for the game. As part of marketing, individual characters was revealed as the release day was approaching. After 7 months of marketing, on December 11, 2008 in Japan, the game was released on the Nintendo Wii, the same time as the arcade version was released in the middle of the month. Many of the hardcore fighting game fans watched this to see if any news came out, and to hopefully scratch the itch for a game that many were aching to play. The gameplay of Tatsunoko vs. Capcom is pretty straightforward, which is why one of the reasons it's easy to grasp even for beginners. The game is played in a tag team way, where two teams face each other till one defeats the other. To control your character, the game features some good fighting styles and a set of attacks that helps you subdue and deplete your opponent's life gauge. The game was one of the first 3D fighting games that developed in a 2.5D environment, while at the same time playing like Marvel vs. Capcom. And just like all the previous Versus games, players could perform a variety of air combos based on the number of button combinations they performed. During the player selection screen, you have the option to choose between 2 players on your team, and alternate between each player during gameplay. But you could also choose to play one giant character instead of 2 small ones, which was something not a lot of games used based on the factor of variety. What's cool is that when you are changing characters, the new incoming one makes a special move attacking the opponent. During the period that the new character plays, the other one is on the bench to regenerate their energy for a comeback. Another cool thing about Tatsunoko vs. Capcom is even though you can only play one player at a time, you can use the player who is on rest to assist in certain special coordinated attacks. These are not typical attacks, however, and they have much more power, and only experienced fighting game vets may be able to make the complex controls necessary to launch those attacks. There are hyper combos for each character and team hyper combos, which works when 2 characters combine their powers to launch a single coordinated attack. Many have applauded Tatsunoko vs. Capcom as being the very game to hold people over and the return to form for the vs. Capcom series. The game's first reviews were overwhelmingly positive, with some of the 4 reviews from Famitsu all giving the game an 8 out of 10. They believe that this was one of the better games that Capcom had released in quite some time, but it failed at one thing, which was to never run out of challenges. Remember when we mentioned that the controls and attacks were not that complex, that after mastering the aspects of the game, there was basically no challenges left in the game itself, leaving basically the only reason why people would still continue playing it after every challenge was completed: the fighting game community and the competitive space of EVO. But due to the local success and increasing international appeal, the game was announced to be released in the international countries, but in different versions to circumvent licensing issues. The game didn't hold much of a chance of going international due to its demanding access requirements, toppled on top of the fact that it was a Wii exclusive at a time when the Wii was beginning to lose interest with majority of the gaming and casual crowds, mainly due to PS3 gaining popularity with more games that people were interested in playing, rather than implementing gimmicks that people grew tired of. It was virtually not possible to secure the necessary approvals to get the game out on time. The official international version of the game was then changed to Tatsunoko vs. Capcom Ultimate All-Stars, which would receive a release at the Rockefeller Center at the Nintendo World Store, where Natsuma did some signings, giveaways, and had demo discs set up for guests to enjoy the game at the venue. Tatsunoko vs. Capcom would go on to win a number of awards to attest to the genius and interesting gameplay. Its challenges did not allow it to win a lot of awards, however, but in 2009, it did win one big in its own genre. Tatsunoko vs. Capcom will forever be known as the one fighting game that almost never made its way to Western gamers. And if you're an anime fan, you probably can't hold your excitement for a game that pits them against some of Capcom's most legendary cast of characters. The biggest issue with it was not the fact that it didn't get enough love amongst the fighting game crowd, but it's because we will never get the chance to see a re-release of its kind ever again. While it's a lot easier to make profit off of licenses for popular Marvel characters, the same can't be said for any of the popular Tatsunoko properties, such as Casshern and Tekken Blade. Anime in itself is such a niche form of media that rarely games of popular series get the chance to be able to sell enough copies to garner any new titles. While it's unfortunate that we won't ever get the chance to see another release of its kind, there may come a time when Capcom does something this out of left field, but there's no telling when that day will ever come. But Tatsunoko vs. Capcom has been on many people's list of favorite Wii exclusives, and rightfully so. Many regard the Wii as being a shovelware console, but if you dig through a lot of the garbage, you'll eventually dig up very gems such as Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, one of the best fighting games you may not have ever played. Check out the other videos on our channel today for more obscure video gaming history, and thank you for watching The Uncommon Valley as we look to the past into the present.